she thought she was buying scrap. A forgotten container rusting near the docks, sealed for over 2 decades, sold at auction for less than the cost of a used tire. But when she pried the doors open and pulled back the heavy tarp, what she found inside wasn't junk. It was history. And it didn't just change her garage, it changed her future. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode might just uncover something even more extraordinary. The shipping yard was quiet that morning, just gulls circling over rusted steel and the faint buzz of machinery somewhere in the distance. Samantha Hayes adjusted her gloves, brushing sweat off her forehead with the back of her hand as she approached Lot 47. The sea container stood like a forgotten tomb, its reddish-brown exterior faded and streaked with corrosion. It was one of dozens lined up in the gravel lot, auctioned off monthly without ceremony. Most were full of busted furniture, cracked tiles, expired paint cans. She hadn't expected to win this one, but for $480, it was hers now. The container had no labels, no shipping numbers, no identifying marks at all, except a hand-scrawled chalk 47 on the side. That alone made her pause. Everything in the yard had paperwork, even the worthless stuff. But this container, it was a ghost. "Buying blind, huh?" came a voice behind her. Samantha turned to see Roy, one of the old dock hands who liked to linger near the yard's edge and sip coffee like it was whiskey. You know they've been trying to get rid of that one for years. No takers. She squinted at him. "Why?" He shrugged, half amused. "Bad luck. Or maybe bad stories. Nobody really knows. But word is, it came off a boat that sank just offshore, recovered years later, sat there sealed, ever since." Samantha tilted her head. "No manifest? None that anyone's ever found. Just showed up one day with a shipping number that doesn't exist anymore. You ask me, that container should be at the bottom of the sea." She looked back at it. The lock was intact, but old, pitted from salt and time. She could feel something pull in her chest. That quiet curiosity she always followed, even when it led to busted knuckles and late-night regrets. She'd bought old engines before, rusted parts, half-built projects that had someone else's dream written all over them. But this was different. By the time she got the bolt cutters around the lock, a small crowd had gathered Roy, a couple of other dock workers, and a teenager from the junkyard who always followed her like a shadow. The lock snapped with a hollow clack, the sound echoing off the surrounding metal. She grabbed the handle, took a breath, and pulled. The container groaned open. Dust and stale air spilled out. Sunlight spilled in. And there it was, something massive under a tan canvas tarp, strapped down with steel brackets and faded ropes. The floor was reinforced, oddly clean. Beneath the edge of the tarp, she could see a gleam of chrome, curved and smooth. Not random junk, not garbage. A silence fell over the group. Samantha took a step forward. She didn't know yet what was under that tarp, not fully. But as the hair on her arm stood up and her gut twisted with something between fear and awe, she whispered under her breath, "What the hell did I just buy?" Samantha's boots echoed as she stepped into the container, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The heat inside clung to her skin, thick and stale. Dust danced in the sunlight, pouring through the open doors. The tarp didn't look like anything special thick, scratchy canvas, frayed at the edges, but it was pulled tight, like whoever covered it had cared how it Saturday, like they were hiding something they didn't want disturbed. She reached out slowly, fingers brushing the coarse fabric. The smell hit her first, not rot, not mildew. Something mechanical, old oil, faint traces of gasoline, and something sharper, almost sterile, like machine cleaner. She crouched and tugged at the bottom edge. The tarp slid a few inches. Beneath it, the first glimpse, smooth, silver casing, bolted plating, cylindrical housing wrapped with cables. Nothing she recognized, but definitely not furniture. She pulled harder. The tarp fell away all at once, collapsing in a dusty heap at her feet. The thing beneath was enormous, maybe 20 feet long, 8 wide. A low-profile chassis with a pointed nose and broad wings folded tight against its sides. Not an aircraft, not a car, not anything she'd ever seen in person, but it looked engineered, and deliberately so. The entire frame was cradled in a custom metal rack that hugged the machine's body. Support beams locked it in place. "What the?" she breathed. A low whistle came from behind her. Roy had crept closer, squinting into the container. "That ain't junk." "No," Samantha murmured. "It's something else." She circled it slowly, brushing away more dust and debris. Near the tail end of the machine, she found markings numbers stamped into the metal. Not a manufacturer, no logo, just a sequence of digits and letters. N216RF. Beneath it, a second, smaller plate had been riveted in place. Property of Naval Systems Research. Do not remove. Her breath caught. Military. She stood frozen, the words burning in her mind. Why would a prototype or whatever this was end up sealed in a civilian container lot? And how had no one noticed or cared for so long? "Looks like something out of a movie," Roy said, stepping beside her now. "You sure you didn't just buy a piece of Cold War history?" She didn't answer. She was already inspecting the base of the rack. Bolted crates had been welded into the support platform. Some rusted, others still sealed. She tried one latch, locked tight. There was more to this than the machine. This was a puzzle sealed decades ago and left to rust in plain sight. Samantha's heart raced. This wasn't just a weird haul. It was a story, trapped in steel and waiting to be told. And whether it led to danger or discovery, she was already in too deep to walk away. Samantha spent the next 3 hours inside the container, moving carefully around the machine, her gloved hands tracing the edges of metal seams and bolted joints. Every part felt intentional, but unfamiliar, as though it had been designed in a different language. She jotted notes in a grease-stained notebook she always carried, scribbling down serial numbers, cable configurations, and anything that looked out of place. Which, frankly, was everything. She hadn't seen anything like this in her years under hoods and behind broken dashboards. The surface plating was lightweight but dense aluminum composite, maybe even titanium alloy. Sections near the underside had what looked like retractable fins or landing gear, now frozen in place. Samantha tried not to let her mind run wild. This wasn't some sci-fi prop. This was real, tangible, and someone had meant to keep it hidden. She turned her attention back to the stenciled code on the side. N216RF. She ran a finger over it, then looked again at the smaller plaque. Naval Systems Research. Do not remove. The words were stamped deep into the metal. No room for fakes or theatrics. Someone in the military had touched this, built it, buried it. Back at her garage that night, she couldn't stop thinking about the container. She cleaned the dirt from her hands, but not from her thoughts. Curiosity nipped at her heels. She powered up her laptop and searched the code N216RF, hoping for a hit in some archive, blog, or government database. Nothing. No matches. Not even similar formatting. Then she searched for Naval Systems Research, and that opened a different door. It was a known facility, or had been a Department of Defense offshoot from the 1,982nd based along the Gulf Coast. Decommissioned in '99 after a fire destroyed most of its research archive. Rumors said it had been experimenting with marine-to-air hybrid craft, prototypes, silent transports, stealth engines, all kinds of things that never made it out of sketchbooks. A chill rolled through her. Was that what she had? The next morning, she returned to the container early, unlocking it with stiff fingers before the sun was fully up. The air inside was cooler now, the shadows longer. She opened one of the sealed crates she'd seen welded behind the machine. The bolts screeched as she forced the lid open. Inside were layers of foam insulation, cracked and yellowed with age. She pulled them aside slowly. Beneath the foam was a thick binder, wrapped in oilskin and tied with twine. Her heart pounded. She untied the string, peeled back the flap, and flipped open the first page. Test Record Unit, RF 216, Engineering Notes. Lead, M. Kovacs. She froze. Not only was this real, it had a name. And now, a lead engineer. This wasn't just a mystery machine anymore. It was someone's life's work, and Samantha had just stepped into the middle of it. The name haunted her all morning. M. Kovacs. It was scrawled across every page of the binder in neat, looping cursive initials, signed after engineering diagrams, handwritten test logs, maintenance records. Whoever Kovacs was, they'd lived and breathed this project. The notes were detailed, obsessive even. Power systems, propulsion theories, ballast testing. Samantha couldn't make sense of all of it, but the depth was unmistakable. This wasn't some forgotten prototype. It was a passion project, one that someone had tried to erase. By noon, Samantha found herself walking back toward the dockyard office, the binder tucked tightly under one arm. The small building had peeling paint and smelled like dust and coffee. Roy sat outside with his usual cigarette, squinting against the Sunday. "You look like you saw a ghost," he said. "I think I did," she replied, dropping the binder on the table between them with a thud. He raised an eyebrow, flipping it open. "Where'd you find this?" "In one of the welded crates. Buried behind that thing." Roy flipped a few pages, then stopped cold at the signature. "Kovacs. You know the name?" He hesitated, then leaned back slowly. "Not well. Just stories. You know Dock 12? Samantha nodded. It was a rotting stretch of pier that had been sealed off for years, half collapsed and fenced up. She'd never seen anyone working there. "Back in the 92nds, Roy began, "there was a woman engineer who worked out of Dock 12. Brilliant, they said. Navy brought her in under some hush-hush contract. Always wore coveralls. Hair in a braid. Walked like she was chasing something that only she could see." Samantha listened, quiet. They were testing something out there. People saw it in the water late at night. Lights, thrumming sounds, shadows under the waves. But then, one day, the dock burned. Whole project vanished. And so did she. What happened? No one knows for sure. Some say she quit. Others say she was forced out. Some say she disappeared with the prototype, that she smuggled it out piece by piece. Samantha's chest tightened. And no one looked for her? Maybe they did. Maybe not hard enough. She stared past Roy at the ocean in the distance. The idea that Marina Kovacs had vanished with her work, only for that work to end up locked in a container sold for scrap, it felt too wild, too tragic. And yet, Roy tapped the binder. "This her signature?" Samantha nodded. "Then that thing in your container might be the ghost of Dock 12. Later that night, alone in her garage, Samantha spread the binder out across her workbench. The last few pages were missing, torn out clean, but one remained, tucked behind a plastic sleeve. It was a map, hand-drawn, a route, maybe, with Dock 12 circled in red, and a single note scrawled beside it. If found, finish it. Samantha couldn't sleep. The map wouldn't leave her mind. She'd traced it with her fingertips, memorized the curve of the dock layout, the penciled arrows pointing away from Dock 12 like veins from a heart. The words still echoed. If found, finish it. That didn't feel like a suggestion. It felt like a plea. The next morning she returned to the container before the heat could settle in. The machine sat silent, wrapped in shadows. She ducked behind it and pried open the remaining crates. Rusted hinges groaned, and flakes of paint fell like brittle snow. Inside, more foam, more dust and tools. Custom tools. Specialized gear she'd never seen before. Spanners shaped to fit uniquely rounded bolts. Torque wrenches with naval calibration tags. Beneath them, rolled blueprints, huge sheets of vellum covered in smudged ink and detailed cross-sections of the machine's inner skeleton. She spread one across the floor of the container and crouched beside it. Every panel, every cable, every bracket had been mapped. The annotations weren't just technical. Some included scribbled thoughts. Too much drag on tail fins need to test against simulated wake. If cabin pressurizes properly, can attempt dual environment cycle. Trust the math. Trust yourself. She stared at that last one for a long time, and then she found the box. Not a crate. A small metal lockbox buried beneath the blueprints. She brushed dust away and noticed it had the same serial code. RF-216. The lock was old, but easy to snap open. Inside, a pair of black fingerless gloves, worn smooth at the palms. A notebook, and a photograph. The notebook was smaller than the binder personal. The cover read, Build Journal Kovacs. She opened it gently. The handwriting was rougher here, faster, less technical. Page after page of emotional shorthand frustrations, doubts, breakthroughs. They're cutting funding again. Doesn't matter. I'll finish it myself. They told me no one would care. I think they're wrong. Not just a prototype. It's proof that we can build for more than war. The photograph was tucked in the back cover. Samantha held it up to the light. A woman, maybe mid-30s, stood beside the machine in a hangar younger, smiling. Her hair was tied in a braid. One hand rested on the chassis. The other held a wrench, like it was sacred. Samantha's throat tightened. Marina Kovacs wasn't just some myth from the yard. She had been real, brilliant, determined, and very, very alone. Until now. Samantha sat back on the container floor, surrounded by pieces of a dream someone had refused to bury, even when the world tried. And for the first time since opening the doors to Lot 47, she didn't feel like she'd just stumbled into a mystery. She felt like she'd been handed a responsibility. The machine, the blueprints, the journals, they weren't trash. They were testimony. If found, finish it. Samantha looked around the container. All right, Marina, she whispered. Let's see what you were building. The garage smelled like rust and purpose. Samantha had cleared off her largest workbench and carefully arranged Marina's build journal beside the blueprint sheets. She read each entry slowly, as if interrupting might disturb the writer. The entries spanned years, starting in pencil, then pen, then whatever marker or grease pencil Marina could find. Every page was a window into her thoughts, her fight, her faith in the machine she called simply the prototype. There was no mention of a formal name, just numbers, RF-216, but the tone in the journal, it was intimate. She wasn't building a machine, she was shaping a belief. Each entry held layers of frustration and fire. They think I'm wasting government money, but they don't see what this can be. Fast, silent, amphibious, human-scale transport. Not for war, for rescue, for survival. We tested sea-to-air transition again. Still too much shake. Needs smoother propulsion handoff. Maybe dual system trigger via cabin pressure regulator? I keep dreaming of it working, gliding over waves like a skipping stone. No noise, just motion. The further into the journal Samantha read, the more personal it became. They stopped answering my memos. My lead engineer quit. Said I was chasing ghosts. They boxed up my notes last week. Told me the project was being absorbed, but no one touched the prototype. I think they're afraid of it. Samantha's hands tightened around the page. Marina had been erased, silenced in her own lab. Cut from the very project she'd built with her bare hands. The journal ended abruptly. No final note, no farewell. Just an unfinished page. Blank, except for the date. The 14th of August, 1999. The day Dock 12 burned. Samantha flipped the book shut, gently. Her reflection caught in the polished metal of the prototype's casing behind her. She felt her throat tighten. Kovacs had left behind more than diagrams and designs. She'd poured her doubt, her courage, her very identity into this machine, and then vanished into smoke and rumor. But the prototype survived. And now, Samantha had it. Over the next few days, she buried herself in the work. She cataloged each section of the machine, sketched new diagrams based on what she saw, and compared them to Marina's blueprints. Most of it was intact, surprisingly so. Some bolts were loose, some joints fused by rust. But the structure had held. The propulsion system was the trickiest. It looked like a hybrid of jet and marine turbine, with hand-machined parts that didn't match anything on the market, not even now. At night, she kept Marina's photo near her work lamp, not for inspiration, for partnership. Samantha no longer felt like she was restoring something. She was continuing something. She wiped sweat from her brow, grease smudging her cheek, and whispered into the still air of her shop. "You didn't build this alone, Marina, and you're not finishing it alone either." Somewhere in the rafters, a wrench shifted and fell with a soft clang. Samantha smiled. She took it as a sign. The first bolt was always the hardest. Samantha stood in the container with the machine fully exposed. Sleeves rolled, gloves on, heart steady. The sun filtered in behind her, casting long shadows over the smooth, forgotten metal. She wasn't here to scavenge anymore. She was here to restore. The engine bay was the obvious starting point. Marina's designs showed two systems. Marine intake, air propulsion, wired through a custom chamber that was likely experimental even for its time. The hybrid turbine looked half sculpture, half science fiction. It reminded Samantha of an engine dreaming it could fly. She started slow. First, assess the damage. Half the fuel lines had disintegrated. The battery system was dry and cracked, the ignition board corroded. But the turbine body? Still sealed, still intact. Whoever had built it had known how to fight time. She spent hours cleaning, documenting, pulling loose parts and labeling them. The more she worked, the more the prototype revealed its secrets. Marina hadn't followed any known model. She'd created something new, an engine that could transition seamlessly between environments. The idea was insane, beautiful, and terrifying. After 3 days, Samantha had the power grid stripped out and was sketching a modern replacement. She'd have to machine most of the parts herself or adapt them. But the shape was there. The soul of the thing still lived in its bones. Late one evening, as the cicadas buzzed outside and her tools clinked softly in the still garage, she heard a knock on the roll-up door. She wiped her hands, confused. No one visited this late. It was Leo, the teen from the junkyard who'd hovered around the auction weeks ago. He wore his usual hoodie, eyes wide behind smudged glasses. You really working on that thing?" he asked. Samantha nodded slowly. "You know anything about turbine systems?" He shrugged. "No, but I know how to stay out of the way, and I learn fast." Something about his honesty made her nod. "All right," she said. "You clean tools. I'll teach you the rest." Leo became her shadow after that. Each day, they pushed further, rewiring panels, replacing seals, rebuilding the ignition system from the ground up. Marina's journal became their blueprint. Every scribbled equation, a map. Every crossed-out failure, a lesson. Samantha talked to the machine, like a person, encouraging it, apologizing when things went wrong. Leo started doing it too, whispering, "Come on, girl, don't die on us now," when a voltage test sparked too bright. After a week, they'd rebuilt the primary wiring harness. After 2, the turbine spun only for a second, but enough to echo through the garage like thunder. Samantha laughed. Leo whooped. They were nowhere near done, but for the first time, she believed. This wasn't just a rebuild. This was a resurrection. And Marina's machine was ready to breathe again. Word travels faster in small towns than engines, Reverend. By the 3rd week, Samantha noticed it, the extra glances at the gas station, the lingering stares near her garage. Someone had posted about the weird seaplane rocket thing she was fixing up. Maybe it was Leo. Maybe Roy. Either way, people were talking. She didn't mind, not anymore. What surprised her wasn't the gossip. It was who showed up because of it. First came June, Avery, retired mechanic, welding instructor, and the first woman who ever handed Samantha a socket wrench. She hadn't been to the garage in years. "Someone told me you're working on a ghost," June said, stepping through the shop doors with a bucket of her own tools. Samantha blinked. "You know Kovacs?" June chuckled. "Knew of her. We weren't allowed near Dock 12 back then. But every woman in the trades heard the rumors. She was building something they wouldn't let her finish. Now you're finishing it. You need hands?" Samantha nodded once. That was all it took. June moved like she'd never retired, tightening frame bolts, checking stress points, nodding at Leo's wiring like a proud aunt. They made room for her at the bench, and she took over turbine calibration, like she'd been waiting 20 years for someone to ask. Then came Father Kent. He didn't say much, just brought old naval schematics in a dusty folder and said, "I used to repair landing craft. Figured you might need eyes." By Friday, even Roy showed up not with coffee, but with a vintage pressure gauge and a greasy manual from a Cold War submarine. "Might not match exactly," he said, "but I figured close is better than nothing." Every arrival came with a skill, a memory, or a part. Samantha hadn't asked for help. But somehow, they came drawn not just by the machine, but by what it represented. A dream that someone had tried to bury. A woman's work that was never supposed to be found again, now reborn in the hands of another, who refused to let it stay silent. They worked together like a living engine, June barking measurements, Leo sketching wiring revisions, Samantha deep in the propulsion assembly, hands raw but determined. At night, when the shop finally quieted, Samantha would sit at her workbench, journal open, photo of Marina beside her lamp. Sometimes she swore the woman was still there, guiding their hands. Not in a haunted way, in a legacy kind of way. One evening, Leo asked, "Why do you think she hid it?" Samantha stared at the machine, gleaming now under hanging lights. "I don't think she was hiding it," she said softly. "I think she was waiting for the right person to find it." Leo smiled. "Good thing it was you." And for the first time in years, Samantha allowed herself to believe he might be right. It happened on a Wednesday. The air was thick with heat, the kind that made metal tools too hot to touch without gloves. Samantha stood over the ignition relay box, wiping sweat from her brow as June adjusted the turbine alignment one final time. Leo double-checked the cables, a checklist in hand. The prototype sat at the center of the garage like a sleeping beast no longer covered in dust and decay, but shining with intention. Everything was ready. They'd reassembled the dual environment intake, reinforced the cabin with salvaged composites, replaced every inch of wiring. The ignition had been completely rebuilt, grounded with new stabilizers, and insulated against backflow surges. The prototype's heart, Marina's heart, was whole again. Samantha glanced at the wall, where Marina's build journal hung open to the final complete page. She reached over and placed her hand on the ignition switch, glancing at June, Leo, and Father Kent, who stood quietly in the corner with grease on his sleeves and prayer in his eyes. "You sure?" June asked. "No," Samantha admitted. But that never stopped her. She turned the key. At first, nothing. Then, a hum, low, deep, vibrating through the floor like thunder trying to remember itself. Lights along the side panels flickered to life-soft blue LEDs wired through the cabin controls. The turbine spun slowly, a whispering whine that built in pitch. Leo clapped his hands once. "Oh my God!" The engine roared. Not loud, not violent. Controlled, contained, powerful. The prototype lifted slightly, not enough to leave the cradle, but just enough to show it could. A breath, a heartbeat. Samantha stepped back, overwhelmed. Her chest felt too tight, her throat too full. June placed a hand on her shoulder, steady as steel. "She'd be proud," June whispered. The engine idled for a few more moments before Samantha powered it down. The garage fell silent again, but not empty. Something had shifted. They had done it. The prototype was alive. They spent the rest of the day running diagnostics, taking photos, documenting every wire, every turn, every reading. Leo streamed footage to a backup hard drive. June adjusted torque specs. Even Roy wandered in, speechless, and nodded once before walking right back out, which, from him, was practically a standing ovation. That evening, Samantha sat alone beside the machine. The others had gone home. The shop now dim and quiet, save for the hum of a single desk fan. She reached into her pocket and pulled out Marina's gloves, the ones from the lockbox. She slid them on, flexing her fingers. They fit perfectly. She placed her hand on the metal casing near the ignition. "You're more than parts," she whispered. "You're proof." The prototype had waited decades in silence. Now it had a voice again, and soon the world would hear it. They unveiled the prototype on a calm Saturday morning, 3 weeks after it first roared to life. Samantha didn't call the press. No drones, no influencers, no hashtags. Just an invitation posted quietly at the local Veterans Center and a few flyers at the hardware store. The only people she wanted there were the ones who understood what had really been resurrected. Not just a machine, but a mission. They wheeled the prototype onto the gravel behind her garage, where the late summer sun caught its curves and edges just right. The chrome reflected the faces of the small crowd that gathered, veterans in faded caps, mechanics with shop-stained hands, a few old dock workers who remembered whispers from Dock 12. June stood beside Samantha, arms folded, beaming. Leo wore a button-down shirt for the first time since she met him, fidgeting nervously near the ignition panel. Samantha stepped forward. She didn't have a script, just a folded photo in her hand, the one of Marina Kovacs, smiling with a wrench in her fingers. "This machine," she said, voice trembling slightly, "was built by a woman named Marina Kovacs. You won't find her name in textbooks. You won't find this project in archives. It was sealed up, boxed away, nearly erased. But she left enough behind to be found. And I think she was hoping someone would care enough to finish it." She unfolded the photo, held it up. She wasn't building a weapon. She wasn't chasing glory. She was designing something to help, to reach, to rescue, to survive. She wanted people to believe that engineering could be compassionate. Samantha looked down at the prototype reborn, real. And now, she's no longer just a ghost in a file. She's here, in every bolt, every seal, every spin of the turbine. The crowd clapped softly. Then Father Kent stepped forward, laying a hand on the prototype and saying a quiet prayer not for success, but for purpose. That night, when the sun dipped low and the crowd had gone, Samantha stayed behind. She pulled a new journal from her bag clean, bound in canvas and opened to the first page. Build Journal Samantha Hayes, RF 216, Second Life Project. She started writing, not technical specs, not measurements, just thoughts, memories, intentions. She decided to donate the prototype, not to a museum, but to a maritime engineering program that offered scholarships to young women. It would sit in their learning center, not behind glass, but out in the open, where students could touch it, study it, continue it. The machine's journey wasn't ending. It was evolving. Samantha closed the notebook, reached up, and clipped Marina's gloves beside her own on the tool wall. 2 sets, 2 lives, 1 story. As she shut off the garage lights for the night, the prototype shimmered faintly under the final beam overhead. Steel may rust, people may forget, but some legacies live in the hands that refuse to stop building, and some dreams, once rediscovered, refuse to die.